When Mariam found out, the house shook with her rage. "You sold me, mother," she screamed. Nadia had always known her fate. From the moment she inherited her mother's healing powers, the same foreboding truth had followed her like a shadow. Every healer in her lineage bore a fatal price. They never lived past 40. At 39, Nadia felt the sands of her time slipping fast. Her daughter Mariam, with her fiery spirit and untamed rebellion, was all Nadia had left in the world. Mariam had been 6 when her father died, a sickness Nadia couldn't heal despite her powers. From that moment, Nadia vowed she would protect her daughter at all costs. But Mariam's defiance frightened her. As they argued in their modest home in Lagos one evening, Mariam slammed her palm on the table. "You don't trust me to take care of myself, Mama. I'm not a child anymore. You think life is a game, Mariam?" Nadia snapped. Her voice was tight with exhaustion. "You don't see the dangers out there. When I'm gone, who will keep you safe? You're not going anywhere." Mariam's voice broke as anger gave way to fear. "Why do you always speak like you're already dead?" But Nadia turned away, her heart too heavy to answer. The following day, Nadia set out for Ibadan. The rains had left Lagos streets slick and muddy, but she needed rare roots to slow the sickness ravaging her body. As she walked along the road, the air suddenly filled with the hum of engines. An entourage of luxury cars sped past her, their black SUVs gleaming under the gray sky. The tires splashed muddy water all over her clothes. She muttered angrily, "Typical rich people. No regard for others." To her surprise, the convoy came to an abrupt halt. The door of the lead car opened, and a tall man in a crisp white kaftan stepped out, his polished brown shoes sinking slightly into the mud. "Madam, are you all right?" he asked in a deep, commanding voice, his face a mixture of concern and authority. Before Nadia could respond, the man's body suddenly stiffened. His hand clutched his chest as he staggered. "Sir! Sir!" a panicked driver shouted, rushing to catch him as he collapsed. Nadia's instincts took over. "Bring him here," she ordered. "Quickly." The man, Christopher Coker, was one of the wealthiest men in Nigeria. Despite his power and influence, he was vulnerable to a mysterious illness that had plagued him since childhood, leaving him in excruciating pain for days at a time. Nadia crushed herbs on the roadside and brewed a quick remedy using water from a passing vendor. Minutes later, Christopher's breathing steadied and his pain eased. "What did you do?" he asked weakly. "I am a healer," Nadia said simply. "And your illness is one I understand. But the cure is not easy or quick. I'll need to prepare it, and you'll need constant care." Christopher nodded, too grateful to argue. "Come to my home. Whatever you need, I will provide." Nadia had never seen a grand mansion such as Christopher's mansion. It was a sprawling estate in Ikoyi, its white walls gleaming under the sun. Servants bustled about, and the scent of freshly cut flowers filled the air. But Nadia's thoughts were with Mariam. "I have a daughter," she told Christopher. "If I stay here to treat you, she must come too." Christopher, still recovering, nodded weakly. "Bring her. She is welcome here." 2 days later, Mariam arrived, her fiery glare challenging everything she saw. "What is this place?" she demanded as her mother led her through the marble halls. "Why are we here?" Nadia sighed. "I am treating a very sick man. And while we are here, you will show respect," Nadia said, her voice commanding. But Mariam wasn't listening. She spotted Christopher descending the grand staircase. He was dressed in a simple shirt and trousers. His eyes met hers briefly before she turned away, her chin lifted defiantly. "She's spirited," Christopher remarked to Nadia later, a faint smile playing on his lips. "She's impossible," Nadia muttered. For weeks, Nadia worked tirelessly, brewing potions and administering treatments. Christopher's health improved rapidly, and he was finally cured from his age-long illness. He began spending time in the garden, watching Nadia grind herbs. During that time, she saw his kindness and humility qualities that surprised her for a man of his wealth. One day, as Nadia packed her tools, Christopher asked, "What can I do to repay you?" "I need nothing," Nadia replied. "I insist," Christopher said firmly. Nadia hesitated, her mind racing. She thought of Mariam, rebellious daughter, and the grim shadow of her own impending death. Finally, she spoke. "Marry my daughter," she said with a pleading eye. Christopher froze, stunned. "Excuse me," he asked. "She is strong-willed, but has a good heart. When I die, she will need someone who can protect her. I see the kind of man you are. You are kind, generous. I can trust you to care for her. My time is near. She will be alone. I want to entrust her to a good man like you, Christopher. I trust you to protect her," Nadia explained. Christopher was silent for a long time before he finally nodded. "If it's what you wish, I will consider it." When Mariam found out, the house shook with her rage. "You sold me, mother," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me away like a property." "Mariam, listen to me." Nadia's voice cracked. "I did this for you. Christopher will protect you." "I don't need his protection," Mariam shouted. "I don't need anyone. I will never forgive you for this." Mariam spat before storming out. But the wedding was arranged. On the day of the ceremony, Mariam stood stiffly in her stunning Yoruba asho oki, her coral beads weighing heavily on her neck. Christopher, dressed in a stylish agbada, tried to meet her eyes, but she looked away. The wedding was an intimate affair attended by only close family members. When it was over, Christopher offered her his arm. Mariam hesitated before taking it, her face unreadable. Life in Christopher's mansion was unbearable for Mariam. She hated the rigid formalities, the servants, and the suffocating wealth. One evening, Christopher found her in the kitchen, trying to cook a simple stew. "You could have asked the chef," he said, leaning against the doorway. "I don't need your staff," Mariam snapped, stirring the pot aggressively.
Christopher sighed.
"Why do you hate me?" "I don't hate you," she replied sharply. "I hate that my life was decided for me. I hate this house. I hate—" "Your mother is dying," Christopher interrupted gently. Mariam froze, the spoon trembling in her hand. "She didn't tell you, because she wanted to protect you. But she's running out of time, Mariam." Tears filled her eyes. She dropped the spoon and fled the kitchen, unable to process the truth. As she stepped out of the kitchen, Mariam overheard a conversation between two servants. "Madam Nadia is getting weaker," one whispered. "She doesn't have much time." Mariam's chest tightened. Her mother had been hiding the truth from her all along. Later, as she confronted Nadia, tears filled her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want you to worry," Nadia said weakly. Mariam sobbed, her rebellion replaced by fear and regret. After Nadia's passing, Mariam was inconsolable. But Christopher was there, his steady presence anchoring her in the storm of grief. Despite her resistance, Mariam found herself drawn to Christopher's quiet kindness. One day, as she wandered into his study, she noticed a chessboard on the table. "Do you play?" Christopher asked, entering behind her. Mariam shrugged. "A little. Let's see how good you are,"
Christopher said.
Their games became a nightly ritual. Christopher was impressed by her sharp mind and quick wit, while Mariam found herself enjoying his dry humor. As the weeks passed, they began to open up to each other. "Why haven't you married before now?" Mariam asked one evening, her chin resting on her hand. Christopher hesitated. "I suppose I've always been too focused on work. And I never found someone I trusted enough," he said. Mariam studied him, her rebellious walls beginning to crumble. One night, Christopher found Mariam crying in the garden. "I miss her," she whispered, clutching a photograph of her mother. Christopher sat beside her, his presence steady and comforting. "She loved you more than anything. That's why she made this choice." Mariam looked at him, her walls crumbling. "I've been so angry at her, and at you. And now?" Christopher asked gently. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I don't want to feel like this anymore." Christopher took her hand, his voice soft. "Then let's start over. No expectations, no pretenses. Just two people figuring this out together." Christopher noticed the shift first. Mariam's sharp, rebellious edges softened, replaced with a quiet curiosity about the world he lived in. The barriers between them began to crumble, piece by piece, and though neither spoke of it, they both felt it. Something fragile and beautiful was beginning to take root. It began with the little moments. On a sunny afternoon, Christopher found Mariam standing by the pool, watching the sunlight dance on the water's surface. "Do you know how to swim?" he asked, stepping closer. Mariam shook her head.
No.
"I don't," she replied with a smirk. Christopher grinned. "Then let me teach you." She hesitated but eventually nodded. Moments later, she was standing at the edge of the pool, her hands clenched into tight fists. "If I drown, I'll haunt you," she said playfully. Christopher laughed, stepping into the shallow and holding out his hand. "I promise you won't drown." With a reluctant sigh, she took his hand and stepped into the water. It was awkward at first. She flailed, splashing water everywhere as he tried to guide her movements. But then she began to trust him, and the laughter that erupted between them was unlike anything Mariam had ever known. "See?" Christopher said, steadying her. "You're a natural," he said jokingly. "I hate you," she said through gritted teeth, though the sparkle in her eyes said otherwise. That evening, they sat by the poolside, drying off as the sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time, Mariam found herself opening up. She told Christopher about her father, her struggles, and her dreams. Christopher listened intently, offering quiet reassurances when her voice wavered. One evening, Christopher led her to the rooftop terrace. The city stretched before them, Lagos shimmering under a blanket of stars. The air was warm and fragrant, carrying the distant hum of life below. "This was my favorite spot as a child," Christopher said, leaning against the railing. "Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I'd come here and dream about what my life could be." Mariam tilted her head. "And did it turn out the way you dreamed?" she asked. Christopher's gaze softened as he turned to her.
Not until recently, he said.
The weight of his words settled between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. "I've never been this close to someone before," he confessed, his voice low and vulnerable. "You've changed my life, Mariam. You make me want to be better." Her heart raced. Her carefully built walls crumbled completely. "And you've changed mine," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Christopher reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. For the first time, Mariam didn't pull away. Mariam couldn't pinpoint the exact moment she fell for Christopher. Perhaps it was the way he made her laugh with his dry humor, or the quiet understanding in his eyes when she spoke about her past. All she knew was that she could no longer deny the truth. She was in love with him. One night, as they prepared dinner together in the grand kitchen, Mariam watched Christopher struggle to chop onions. Tears streamed down his face, and his muttered curses made her laugh until her sides hurt. "You're terrible at this," she teased, reaching over to take the knife from him. "And yet, you keep letting me try," he replied, his grin infectious. In that moment, the last of her resistance melted away. "I think I love you," she blurted out, the words surprising even herself. Christopher froze, the onion forgotten. Slowly, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You think?" Mariam flushed, suddenly unsure. But before she could backtrack, Christopher stepped closer, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I know I love you," he said softly. Their first kiss was tentative at first, but it deepened quickly, fueled by the intensity of emotions they had both been holding back. For the first time, Mariam felt completely safe and completely seen. Their happiness, however, was not without its challenges. Among the most formidable was Ifioma, a family friend of Christopher's who had always harbored feelings for him. Ifioma had known Christopher since they were children, and in her mind, they were destined to be together. When she learned of his marriage to Mariam, her disbelief turned to jealousy and bitterness. "She's not one of us," Ifioma whispered to Christopher's business associate at a party, as she smiled sweetly. "A girl from mile 2? Do you think she even understands the responsibilities of being in his world?" But her smile faltered when Christopher entered the room, his hand resting protectively on Mariam's back. His gaze swept over Iphioma, without a flicker of acknowledgement, as though she were just another guest. Iphioma's bitterness festered. The first attempt to sow discord came in the form of a carefully crafted lie. Iphioma approached Mariam at a charity event, her smile dripping with false warmth. "You must be Mariam," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I've heard so much about you." Mariam stiffened. "And you are?" "Iphioma. Christopher, and I go way back. In fact, there was a time we thought we'd marry, but life had other plans, I suppose." Mariam's smile tightened. "Funny. Christopher never mentioned you." Iphioma's eyes glittered with malice. "Oh, I'm sure he didn't mean to keep secrets. But you know how men are. They like to protect their wives from uncomfortable truths." Though Mariam brushed off Iphioma's comments, a seed of doubt began to grow in her mind. That night, Christopher noticed her distance. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Nothing," Mariam replied, her tone clipped. "Mariam," he said gently, taking her hand. "Talk to me." Reluctantly, she told him about Iphioma's insinuations. Christopher's expression darkened. "Iphioma has been a friend, nothing more. Whatever she told you, it's a lie. Please don't let her get to you." Though his words reassured her, Iphioma didn't give up. Iphioma's next move was bolder. She staged an intimate dinner at her home, inviting Christopher under the guise of discussing a charity initiative. She arranged the setting carefully, candlelight, soft music, and wine. When Christopher arrived, he immediately sensed something was off. "Where's everyone else?" he asked, his voice cool. Iphioma smiled coyly. "They couldn't make it. But I thought it might be nice for us to catch up, just the two of us." Christopher stood, his expression hard. This was a mistake. "Wait." Iphioma grabbed his arm. "Christopher, I've loved you for years. Why can't you see that we belong together?" He pulled his arm away, his voice firm. "I'm married, Iphioma. And I love my wife." Mariam learned about the incident when Christopher returned home and told her everything. "She is so desperate," Mariam said, her voice trembling. "Let her try," Christopher replied. "She can't touch what we have." Iphioma's jealousy had long since crossed the boundaries of reason. Her attempts to sow doubt and discord between Christopher and Mariam had failed at every turn, leaving her consumed with bitterness. As days turned into weeks, she became more desperate, her obsession with Christopher turning dark and dangerous. "If I can't have him," she whispered to herself, her hands trembling with fury, "then no one can." One evening, Mariam attended a community outreach event organized by Christopher's company. Christopher had stayed behind to finalize a business deal, promising to join her later. Mariam was surrounded by volunteers when a car pulled up beside her. A woman stepped out, dressed in a staff uniform. "Madam Mariam," she said politely, "your husband sent me to pick you up. There's been an emergency." Mariam frowned but didn't hesitate. Christopher often sent staff when his schedule got tight. As she climbed into the car, the woman locked the doors, and the vehicle sped off into the night. It wasn't until Mariam noticed they were heading in the opposite direction of home that her heart began to pound. "Where are we going?" she demanded, her voice sharp. No response. "Stop this car!" Mariam shouted, her fists banging on the windows. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his expression cold. "You'll understand soon enough." Mariam was taken to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Lagos. Iphioma was waiting, her face twisted with rage and triumph. "I warned you," Iphioma hissed, her voice trembling with emotion. "You don't deserve him. You never did." Mariam's wrists were tied, but her spirit remained unbroken. She glared at Iphioma. "And you think you do? A woman who stoops to this? Christopher doesn't love you, Iphioma. He never did." Iphioma's face contorted with pain, then fury. "You think you've won? You think your love is so special?" She pulled a knife from her bag, her hand shaking as she held it up. "If I can't have him, I'll make sure you don't either." Mariam's heart raced, but she refused to show fear. "You'll never win, Iphioma. Even if you take me out of the picture, Christopher will never love you. The words seemed to push Ifioma further into madness. She advanced, but before she could do anything, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Christopher had realized something was wrong the moment he arrived at the event and found Mariam missing. He'd immediately called the police, his connections ensuring they acted quickly. Over there, a police officer shouted as they stormed the warehouse. Ifioma screamed in frustration as officers surrounded her, forcing her to drop the knife. Christopher rushed in, his heart pounding as he spotted Mariam tied to a chair. "Mariam," he called, his voice breaking. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. Christopher. He was by her side in moments, his hands working frantically to untie her bindings. As soon as she was free, she threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "It's over," he murmured, holding her tightly. "You're safe now." Ifioma, meanwhile, was dragged away by the police, her screams echoing through the warehouse. "This isn't over," she shouted. "Christopher, I loved you. I loved you." But Christopher didn't look at her. His focus was entirely on Mariam. Weeks later, life had returned to a semblance of normalcy. Ifioma was behind bars, awaiting trial, and Christopher had doubled the security around his home and Mariam. One evening, as they sat in the garden, Mariam turned to Christopher. "She almost took everything from us," she said softly, her voice still tinged with disbelief. Christopher took her hand in his grip firm and reassuring. "She didn't, and she never will. What we have is stronger than anything she could throw at us." Mariam rested her head on his shoulder, her heart finally at peace. "I never thought I could feel this safe, this loved." Christopher kissed her temple, his voice steady. "You're the one my heart beat for, Mariam. Nothing will ever change that." Their love, once hesitant and fragile, had grown into something unbreakable, a bond forged in fire and strengthened by every challenge they faced. Years later, Mariam and Christopher sat in their garden, now lush and vibrant. A little boy ran between them, his laughter filling the air. Mariam rested her head on Christopher's shoulder. "I never thought I'd find happiness like this." Christopher kissed her forehead. "Your mother saw something I didn't. She knew we'd find our way." Together, they had turned an arranged marriage into a love story for the ages, honoring Nadira's sacrifice and building a life filled with love, trust, and unbreakable bonds. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from so I can give you a shout out in my next video.